So, that's kind of like, preparing for the garden. There's a lot of things you gotta do. And my lovely wife is not here because she went to get my book that I'm going out of to talk about preparing for worship. So I was prepared. I just left it at home. So we'll get started.
That's a preacher's worst nightmare. Dreams about the fact that where's my note?
Yeah. Well, I got here. I stepped out of the car like, oops.
Before you know it.
Yeah. So, but we'll still get started. So, and one of the things I want to talk about, what do you do to get ready for worship? Is it you just get up Sunday morning and come to church? Or what are things that you can do to get ready for worship?
Get your songs ready. Get your songs ready to go.
Get your songs ready to go. Yeah. Some of us got to do some more preparation for worship when you do class, when you preach. You got a lot of study. And Joe, puts a week worth of work into, getting his lessons ready. So
We always try from when our kids were really little not to do anything special on Saturday night. So they could polish their shoes.
Yeah. Polish your shoes.
And take their bath.
Yeah.
And get ready.
So Sunday morning was easier.
Right.
What else? I know when I was younger, what we would do, our teachers, we had workbooks that we had in classes. And I know a lot of times, just like school, you hate doing homework. But when you went through that book and went ahead and completed everything, what was class like?
If you had something to say,
You learn something.
Right, because why? You prepared your lesson, and even though you didn't have the lesson in class yet, you knew what the materials were about, and yet you were able to start into deeper discussions because it wasn't the first time you heard about it, right? And I know sometimes, Joe and Wednesday night, hey, y'all read Hebrews chapter 7 to get ready for next week's lesson. Do we do that? Some of us do, some of us don't, right? But what does that do when you read the chapter?
Get your mind set to hear what he has to say about it.
Right. Isn't that important?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because not only can you know what the class is going to be about, but you can start thinking of questions so you have deeper discussions in class. And when you have deeper discussions, what happens? You learn a little bit more instead of being on the superficial level, right? When David was anointed king, what was one of the first things he did?
he started to pray.
Started to pray.
Ask God to help him know what to do.
Ask God to help him. But did he have a big worship and praise to God, to start his kingship off right? And what preparation did David have to do? You'll go to 1 Samuel. I know it's there. I can't remember the verse. Chapter.
Just read First Samuel.
Yeah, just read 1 Samuel.
Well, one thing he did was talk to the family of Saul and mourn with them and ask for their cooperation.
And we talked a little bit about that last week, didn't we? Okay. But did he prepare to go get the Ark of the Covenant and bring it back? And why did he do that? It was supposed to be there. But what happened during that time?
That's when Uzzah messed up.
And I may go through my whole lesson in 10 minutes. So that's when Uzzah messed up. Did he do wrong? Because why?
He wasn't supposed to touch it.
But he thought he was doing the right thing. And probably instinctive. It's probably not, it's probably just, hey, I'm going to save it just like you doing something about the fall.
But in the first place, they weren't carrying it right.
Correct.
If they'd have been carrying it right.
It wouldn't have happened.
It was like people were there.
Yeah.
And David did it again later on and did it.
Right, did it right. But why did David do it again later on?
Because he didn't take it all away.
Well, he didn't take it all away, but what did he find out? The house of, I can't,
Wherever it was.
but that was very blessed because of the Ark of the Covenant was with them. And David was like, well, hey, that's why we need this here so that we'll be blessed. Because he knows that worshiping God, being with God like you're supposed to, is a blessing that's going to bless your life. And that's what David was there for. What else did David do in preparation for worship?
David was always a man of deep devotion to God. Not only did he pray, but he would write songs and lyrics to songs and prepared others. You know, when he was getting his son ready to take over for him, remember he assigned all the priests and special people. And he even had, I think it was 2,000 singers that were supposed to, that was what their job was. I think it was 2,000 singers. So he thought way ahead, you know, because he knew that he wasn't going to be able to build the house of God, but he was thinking way ahead that these things needed to be taken care of and they needed to be well thought out and well planned and structured. So he spent a lot of time thinking along those lines, not just praying about it, but doing it.
Yeah, because God told him, hey, you're not going to build the temple because of bloodshed. But he did everything in his power to get everything ready for Solomon to build the temple.
Thanks, Kim.
He's been waiting on that.
Now, in conclusion, so 2 Samuel chapter 6, if someone would turn to that. And read 14 and 15.
Then David danced before the Lord with all his might. And David was wearing a linen ephod. So David and all the house of Israel brought up the ark of the Lord with shouting and with the sound of the trumpet.
So David was worshiping God how? With all his might, it says, right? So doing everything in his power to worship God, to be there. How do we worship God a lot of times? I know that we, got accustomed to just sitting here with straight faces and that's about it, right? And not necessarily, a lot of emotion in our worship, is it? So, James McInerney, in his book, The Source, tells the story of a man named Erbal. Erbal was a farmer living in about 2200 BC. He worshiped two gods, one a god of death, the other a goddess of fertility. One day, the temple priest tells Erbal to bring his youngest son to the temple for sacrifice if he wants good crops. Erbal obeys, and on the appointed day drags his wife and boy to the scene of the boy's religious execution. After the sacrifice of Erbal's boy, the priest announced that one of the fathers would spend next week in the temple with a new temple prostitute as an offering to the goddess of fertility. Erbal's wife is stunned as she notices desire written more intensely across his face than she has seen before, and she is overwhelmed to see him eagerly lunge forward when his name is called. The ceremony over, she walks out of the temple with her head swimming, concluding that if he had a different God, he would have been a different man. It seems that whenever the topic of worship is taught, we have a feeling of curiosity as the class or sermon begins. We may even feel a bit of nervousness because we are fearful of what will be said. Yet, worship is an act designed to create community, not controversy. This community is with other Christians, but more importantly, with God. Worship should change us, but does it? If not, maybe we are too much like Erbal. If we worship a different God, we will be different people. So just something to think about of how you get into your worship. It's said that a political figure's first official act in office defines their time of service. In 2 Samuel 5, after his first anointing by Samuel in years of trial, adversity, and conflict, David is anointed king over all of Israel. In chapter 6, we notice that David's first official act as king of Israel was restoring the proper worship of God. But as David tried to worship God, he discovered something that many of us know. Sometimes worship can be challenging. So what are some of the challenges in worship?
Keeping our mind focused on what we're supposed to be doing.
That's a big one right there. And that's one of the main things, because you can be here but not.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Be here but not be present.
But not be present. So what are some things that you do to try to clear your mind? And we know that the world is a big hindrance to worship, not only because of all the things that happen, that, competing interests, you might say, but also because the things that happen in this world keep our mind from worship. So what are some of the things that you do to try to help focus your mind for worship when you are coming to worship?
Taking
You know,
notes.
the night before, we have to get enough rest.
Right.
That's important because if you go to bed with the right thoughts in your mind and prayers, then you'll sleep in more restful sleep so that you'll have the stamina you need for the Lord's Day.
And Chuck, I think that's very important what he said. Pray and get your mind right with God where it needs to be so that you're prepared for worship the next day, because you're getting your mind focused of where it needs to go, right? Kim, you said,
I said taking notes, helps
Take
stay focused.
and how does notes keep you focused?
Because if you wander, your mind wanders and you look back down at your notes, you're like, oh yeah, this is where we're at.
Plus, believe it or not, writing stuff down, and I don't do this hardly anymore because I can't read it after I write it, but what does that do?
It helps me remember if I
It
write.
helps you remember,
If I never look at it again.
Yeah.
I remember it then.
right? So because you're reinforcing that memory.
I started taking notes when I had 2 little kids. And I thought when I left the worship service, I remember what the sermon was about. And I didn't know if that was me or the kids or the preacher.
Blame it on
Part of it was the preacher, I found out.
Oh, okay.
No, I won't tell you, but, but I've continued to mostly take notes. I don't every time, but I mostly do, and that helps me, even if I never look at them.
Yeah, I truly believe that, yeah.
Another thing that John and I do, there's a couple of programs on TV in the mornings
Yes.
that we watch and don't do anything else while we're doing that. We have to get up earlier, but we watch a couple of them that are members of the Church of Christ, and that helps me get attuned.
It starts getting you focused, getting you prepared.
Right, sing with them and all of that. So it's a little bit of worship before
Right.
we come.
What else? Anyone else?
Finding the scriptures in the Bible. When the person, like you teaching class saying 2 Samuel, whatever, turning to that section, or the preacher saying, we're in, whatever chapter it is, whatever book, it helps.
Right, because you start reading along.
And it makes you go to this, whereas if I'm just sitting here, then I'm fiddling.
So you're actively participating in what's being taught by looking up the scriptures.
And that helps me because I am not a sitter. If I just sit, I have to do something,
I'm
whether
there with
it's
you.
doodling or whatever. But turning to it and taking notes and stuff helps me in a little, keeping me focused better.
And what about, go ahead, Mary.
I was gonna say, this worship is not just the sermon,
Right.
but we need to pay attention to what we're singing.
Yeah.
But communion is something that's very important. We talk about that being very important. And this is something that maybe I shouldn't say. I wish we would take a little longer with it. Just standing there and saying a prayer and taking about 10 seconds, and then another one is a little, over too quick. We need to spend a little more time on it. I know some of the men read a scripture or something like that. But even what's up there, you don't have time to read it. So it's,
So sometimes it can go too fast because we have
oh, and those little things too take some.
right. Some of them are harder to open than others. But I can see what you mean, because used to you had more time because we did pass the plate around.
Pass it out, you
and
have time to think about it.
Yeah.
And, or even just open your Bible and read about it during that time. And I know why we do that.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, so we've got to figure out something.
I prefer a little longer because it's like, let's hurry.
Gotcha, okay. It just seems rushed.
Yeah.
Seems rushed, okay. Anyone else, how do you prepare for worship? And I've got something I don't believe anyone's said yet.
I take a lot of time in prayer. I spend a lot of time, I get here early and pray about my sermon and pray about the worship time and pray for each person that's going to be a part of the service. So that helps too.
Yeah.
Because you know God's blessing is upon you.
And I wanted to mention that because I think prayer is important, especially when you're participating in the worship service, you're doing something to pray that, you know, God gives you the ability and the blessing to do it to His glory and make sure that you're not calling attention to yourself, because it's not you that people should be focused on. And I know sometimes that's hard, especially when you're preaching, song leading, or prayer. But whatever you do, it really needs to focus everybody's attention on God and the worship service. So that's something that I pray for, to make sure that, you know, we're focused on God no matter what's going on in the service. Anything else?
One of the things that I do too is I'm very odd. I can listen to things and it sticks in my head more so than visual things. But I will turn on Christian music, acapella music, and listen to that and sing along, and that helps as well.
Yeah.
Right.
It's kind of like praying. It expresses your heart.
Right, it focuses. So a lot of good things we heard this morning. Get up, start watching some services, you know, some other programs that get us prepared for our worship service, because it gets your mind focused. Praying, it focuses your mind where it needs to be. And also song, you know, it can focus your mind where it needs to be. So several good things to help get you ready for worship. But not only that, if you know what we're studying, to go into and start studying that, maybe it would be good. And I know a lot of times we used to have sermon next week or this week or next, you know, I'll be talking tonight about X, Y, Z. Then, you know, maybe go in and start doing a little studying on that so that you can prepare your mind to be able to listen a little bit more intently and understand what's being said. Because sometimes first time you hear something, it kind of glazes over, right? So you need to be careful. And I had a person this week tell me, you know, you told me that, but the first time you told me that, it just really went over, not necessarily over her head, but she was focused on something else. So she really didn't hear it, but she knew I said it. Does that make sense? So something to think about.
Wives know that more than anybody.
In 2 Samuel 5, after his first anointing by Samuel, in years of trials and adversity, like I said, David, discovered that a lot of things can keep you from worshiping. It can be challenging. Many come to church building on Sunday after just completing a week of trials, disappointments, and adversities. And that's really what happens in this world, right? There's a lot of things that go on. Then we are challenged to dismiss all the cares of this world from our minds. And that's hard to do, right? Because that's your life. There's a lot of things going on, whether it be, family, kids, friends, relatives, neighbors. There's a lot of work, the job. There's a lot of things that go on that are constantly on your mind. It's a nice line to use as we begin corporate worship, but for many, it's not realistic. Why is that? if it's so ingrained in your life because you're having major problems at work or major problems at home, is that easy to get your mind on worshiping God? It's going to be hard. It's easier said than done. As David tried to worship God with all his might, several things happened that could have drawn his mind away from worship. As we discover these distractions and how David overcame them, we will learn how we too can find God in worship. 3 practical steps toward finding God in worship. Effort. So how much effort do you put into it, like we were talking about? How are you getting prepared for worship? For David to worship God properly, it required recovery of the Ark of the Covenant, as we talked about. The recovery would have required 30,000 men, a new cart, and a 50-mile trek through the mountains carrying an ark they could not touch. Yet David recognized the great significance of the ark as God's earthly throne. As a true God-following king, he wished to acknowledge Jehovah's kingship by restoring the ark to a place of prominence in the nation. When one considers the effort put forth by David to worship God, the question must be asked, how strong is my effort to worship God? Would I make a great sacrifice? Would I go 50 miles by foot or by car for that matter? As we attempt to answer these questions, it is good to be reminded of Romans chapter 12 and verse 1, which tells us that worship is not confined to a certain address or an appointed time. It is also good to be reminded that God watches us 24/7. So is our life a worship to God? Should be. He sees the effort you put in on your job, your recreation, and your stuff, and he sees the amount of effort you put into him. Then we'd be reminded that God is a jealous God. Yet even when we understand that all of life is worship, there will be times that the effort to worship becomes difficult. Things will happen along the way that will knock the wind out of your sails. 2 Samuel 6, verse 6 says that Uzzah reached out and touched the ark, which is described as an irreverent act. Uzzah's intent may have been good, but he violated the clear instructions God has given him concerning the ark in Numbers chapter 4, verse 15. Can you imagine how David felt in the middle of what should have been a glorious moment, and then tragedy strikes? So David his whole thoughts was this was going to be great. We're going to get the ark back to where it belongs. Everything's going to be good. And then tragedy strikes in the middle of it. What did that make David do, as we talked about?
He became angry.
He became angry. He left the ark where?
Where it had ended.
Yeah, where it happened. Obed-Edom's household. Yeah. So not only do we need to, as we talked about, have effort, but we need to have endurance. David's initial reaction was resentment. As you said, he got upset. His attempt to honor the Lord had resulted in a display of God's wrath. David was disappointed with the apparent unfairness of God. As a result, he was reluctant to continue his trek with the ark and left it at the household of Obed-Edom. Yet because God's presence was in his house, Obed-Edom was richly blessed. We can almost see a light bulb going off over David's head as he realized, when God is present, I can be blessed even in disappointment. So he and his men went to the house of Obed-Edom to retrieve the ark. So I thought that was something when I read that, is that, after he left the ark there, Obed-Edom was blessed, and because the ark of God was there. God was they were in God's presence. So David seen this and thought, hey, that's where I need to be. I need to have that for the nation and for me. So he did go and retrieve the ark. But aren't we like David at times when we hurt? Very often the last thing on our mind is worship. Yet when we are hurting, a journey to the presence of God is exactly what we need. It may be a difficult journey, and you may have some reservations because of your disappointment. However, when you finally find yourself in the presence of God, you will be richly blessed. So have we seen people that had a recent death, recent sickness, and where are they at? Next time church doors are open, they're at worship. because they realize that God is in control and things happen on this earth. So, I do find that it is comforting to be here in the presence of God and your Christian friends and brothers and sisters. It really is.
When my grandfather died on Monday, we had a funeral on Wednesday. We were at church that night, and there were people who asked my grandmother why she was there. And I thought that was funny. We're here because it's Wednesday night.
We have church.
And that's always been the practice in our family, that we don't miss worship unless we
You're
can.
sick or you can't be in it.
Greater comfort can you get,
Then
you
being,
your loved ones in church, that's death and again.
that's where you should want.
Yeah, that's close to it, close to death.
If you can. But I remember that, I wasn't that old yet, but I remember them asking.
I said, why are you here?
I'm supposed to be here. I'm supposed to be here.
That's right. Another thing, this is probably going to get a lot of us thinking, but we have effort, where we're getting ready, we have endurance, so that we make sure we're continually in God's presence. But what about enthusiasm?
That's a hard one to build sometimes.
Right. What does it say in verse 14 and 15 of 2 Samuel? I think it was, again, chapter 6, verse 14 and 15.
David was dancing before Yahweh with all his strength, and David was girded with a linen ephod. And so David and all the house of Israel were bringing up the ark of Yahweh with shouting and with the trumpet.
With all his strength, with shouting, with trumpets. I mean, they were very enthusiastic about it, right? The phrase that stands out in verses 14, 15 is all his might. Although dancing may not be part of our worship assemblies, worshiping with all our might certainly should be. It is no secret that many churches have been involved in the worship wars, but one can't help but wonder if we would have experienced all the controversy we have and concern to worship if we would have been using that same energy to worship. When the Bible speaks of worship, it uses words like passion, spirit, tremble, cry out, shout, awe, and reverence, just to name a few. We're called to worship from the very core of our spirits. Someone get John chapter 4, verse 20. John 4, 24.
God is spirit. Those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth.
So God is spirit, we must worship him in spirit and in truth. So how do we worship God?
In the same way.
Should be the same way. We should be focused on him, that we're listening to his truth, and that we're also, join our minds. If our mind's not focused on God during our worship services, or Christ during our worship services, are we truly worshiping him in spirit? No. I mean, because if our mind's not with it, our spirit's definitely not there, right?
That'd be truth, but not spirit.
Yeah. Now, we must put a caveat here. When we worship with enthusiasm, we may receive some criticism. David's wife, Michal, despised David in her heart when she saw his outward display of worship. She called it what? Undistinguished, vulgar. David responded by simply saying it was before the Lord, but people may not refer to her worship as vulgar, but enthusiastic worship is often labeled with terms such as distracted, disorderly, or even self-seeking. When David heard the criticism, he simply said it is right to celebrate and that he would continue to do so. On the flip side of this, we need to be careful we are not like Michal. Often we may see people worshiping in a way we are not accustomed to. Have we done that before? Does it shock us? Yeah. Because we're not accustomed to certain things. I'm not saying everything's right to do, but there's what do we normally do? We just sit here and barely say amen, right? And, you know, we go to some of our other churches and do raise hands, or are they getting their singing a little bit more than just standing there mouthing the words? So we gotta be careful there. Often we see people worshiping in ways we are not accustomed to and become critical without investigating what the Bible truly says about what they're doing. When we start binding where God has not, we become like Michael. Michael could have used her fussing energy to join in and worship in her own God-appointed way. And if she should have done that, then David's worship style would not have been such a distraction, and she would not have been punished for her attitude. So I know it's kind of a touchy subject, because a lot of times we, you know, hear of some places jumping up and down and doing flips and all that, which I think is a distraction from worship. But should we be a little more enthusiastic in our worship when we're worshiping God? And I'm not saying like at a football game, but should we show a little more emotion? A little more emotion?
Not the only time we see real heartfelt emotion is at a baptism or something like that.
Right.
Where people are moved to tears.
Yeah.
That's great. But there ought to be other times that we are moved to joy
Celebrate.
and celebration. And I'm not sure what that looks like. You don't see that.
That's what's kind of scaring me to, you know, talk about this, because, yeah, I don't know what it looks like, and, you know, you don't want to encourage something that shouldn't be. Roger?
Well, yeah, enthusiastic, but then we're told to be reverent, so, you
It's
know,
gotta be done, and yeah, it's
right.
Fine line there, you're not gonna be, discouraging to somebody, you know, if you don't show.
right. So
There are some songs we sing that, you know, says, and we stand,
mhm,
and we stand up.
Yeah.
That gets your attention.
right.
That seems more enthusiastic. There are some times when we do want to realize, we tell ourselves that we're talking to God
Right.
in a song. So,
And we are.
Yeah.
We are. Chuck?
You know, I think something as simple as, when something is said in, you know, as the preacher's making a point or something, to respond and say amen can be both positive and negative. It shows that you are involved in what he's talking about, and that you
Agreed.
are encouraging the other people in the congregation to listen to that point. But it also can be distracting to others, and so it's difficult to balance that.
Right.
But I think I don't think it's wrong to do that.
I don't think it's wrong either, but why is it disturbing to others?
but we
They're-
don't.
We don't do it. I mean,
They're
yeah,
not used to it.
we're not used to it. We don't do it. That's it.
That's how we're raised. I mean, I'm thinking about my youth. If I had made a noise where I was raised, it was very irreverent. You know, you sat still and you did not show emotion.
Right.
And being around people when I worship with other congregations, or I go with my children, and they're, you know, raising their hands, and it makes me feel uncomfortable, because it's almost like I'm
yeah.
not praying, I'm being irreverent. And it's, you know,
I know where
it
you're
bothers me
at.
that I feel that way, because I shouldn't feel that way. You know, I want to. If I'm in the car and I'm singing, I do all kinds of stuff because I feel that way. I'm really joyful. But here, I don't want condemnation on me if I feel a way and
Right.
act a way.
Right.
Because that's how I feel, because I was raised that way from the church.
Right. And I understand.
So-
Yeah. Anyone else?
Terry, I went to Kenny Colson growing up. There was all kinds of, I want to say chaos, because you had singing in tongues, you had dancing, you had it all. People going down the front to pray, and people falling out. So, and that's, you know, I was getting back into rededicating myself to worship. That's why I questioned different denominations. Everything is so different with this church. that's how I came across such funds. And I felt like the other church I did to, we didn't do Bible study, you just listened to a preacher.
Right.
You learned a verse. And she didn't really participate. Unless it was all being seen of outwardly worship. I was just never comfortable with that.
And I think it's all, like I said, it's what we get accustomed to and what, or maybe just because of our personality, not something that we're used to doing or want to call attention to ourselves a lot of times. It's like I said, I mean, it's a fine line on what's getting into worship emotionally and enthusiastically, and then what's causing disorder. So we've got to be very careful there. And again, preparing for worship, we should be praying that God helps us be there to be in spirit and truth, but also not to focus anything on us, but to make sure everything's focused on God, because that's who we are truly here to worship. Why is there such an emphasis on worship in the Bible? Is God an egotist? Does he constantly have to be told how great he is in order to get satisfaction? What does it say in the Bible? Even these rocks would worship him if you didn't. No, our praises I make God bigger or more glorious except in our hearts. So think about what worship and praise should be doing to us. It should be focused and should make it more glorious in our hearts and in the eyes of man. Nor does our lack of praise diminish that. His honor and glory except in our own hearts and in the eyes of man, he is God. He is all-knowing, all-being, and all-powerful. What is man that God should be mindful of him? God doesn't command us to assemble for worship so much because of what worship does for him, but rather for what worship does for us. So that's something to think about. Is worship is designed to do what? To encourage us, to get us strengthened by being with our family and God, and to learn from his word so that we go out to the world and do what? And teach and be the Christian that he wants us to be. The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. In Mark chapter 2, verse 27. God needs nothing from us, but we need everything from him. David understood that. David realized how desperately he needed God. So he was willing to put forth the effort, endurance, and enthusiasm needed to worship. So next time, let's think about, like I said, God doesn't need us, but we need God. So with that frame of mind, what are you planning on doing next time we get ready for worship? Are you going to get up and get focused? Or do you do everything like you normally do and then, okay, it's 9 o'clock, I need to leave? And that's what many of us do, before we go to church. So when you consider the effort put forth by David to worship, think about how it compares to yours. And also, if you want to give an example, can you think of someone you have known for which worship required great effort? Don't need to call out names. I know Joe always talked about Granny Chase, how she was, invalid in bed, but she did everything she could to worship God. So anyone have some examples of that? It takes great effort.
I know there are people who have physical problems.
Mm-hmm.
I'll say my own particularly.
Oh, yeah.
She's 98 years old. Her back hurts all the time. Joe's back hurts all the time. There are some people, and I guess we've all been guilty of this, who don't come if we have a little headache or you're tired. I've heard a lot of people say they don't come to worship because they're tired. And that, I can't understand that.
Well, that goes to do they prepare?
Yeah, and that's part of the reason you don't do something on Saturday.
So it should be read. Archie?
We had a woman that worked with us in a wheelchair, and she did more than a lot of us did. When we were doing some stuff, they're clearing some wallpaper off and stuff like that, so put some new stuff on. she rode up in her wheelchair and reached up as high as she could.
Mhm.
And she lived, what, 3 miles from church, she's there, couldn't drive, she was there every service. Now, she put.
Put forth a lot of effort to be there. Sean, was you about to say something or? Okay, I just, okay.
Sure, Carter.
Yeah, sure.
So we can see that there's a lot of people that can put forth effort that is physically challenged, but they're gonna be there and do what they can.
I was saying, you know, let one drop the soundworks first, and see what to church.
Yeah, too. We can use any excuse, can't we? Yeah. Because what are we doing to ourselves? We're justifying why we're not there, which really is not justification.
Would you go to work on Monday with the same situation? Of course you would.
Yeah. How can we use disappointments as a conduit for worship instead of a distraction? How can we use disappointments as a conduit for worship instead of distractions?
There comes a time when we have to lean on the Lord. That, you know, when the struggles come, we turn it over to the Lord and let Him work out our problems for us, you know, and not try to manage God, but instead let God manage us.
Yeah, and lean on each other too.
Lean on each other. I think that's important because when there's, you know, sicknesses and, you know, we found this out, you know, Robin's found this out, a lot of women have found this out, that you've got a big support group here. And if you stayed home, would you have that support? Not as much. So if you're frequently here to worship, people get to know you, they know your issues, know the problems, you have that support group, and everybody tries to pitch in, you can rely on people to help out. And, hey, I go through this, can you know, what did you experience? That's a lot of things that can also be a positive for coming to worship service when maybe you just didn't feel like you wanted to. Yeah, something to think about. If a non-Christian visitor concluded, what would a non-Christian visitor conclude about our congregation's worship service? Do they think it's biblical? Do they think we're doing the right thing? Do they think we're too quiet? Do they think we're too noisy? What would a non-Christian visitor think?
I think we're friendly. Heard that
Yeah,
before.
friendly. Yeah, make sure you're friendly.
Hey, Terry,
Yes.
back to the topic of being encouraged. If you're the one that's suffering, you don't understand what encouragement that is to others when you do come here,
True.
when you're going through something.
Because not only does it encourage you, it encourages the others because, yeah, definitely. Well, thank you, everyone. I appreciate it.